You're an idiot. Banks pay you nothing. The Fed will not let anything bad happen. Those were some of the responses Vern Gowdie got when he pleaded with readers to bank their cash before the crash back on the 29th of January. We now know who was right and who was wrong. Listen on to hear Vern's second warning.
Uh, Hello, my name is Vern Gowdie. My career in financial planning began in late 1986. So it's coming up 34 years being involved in the investment industry. I'm now living, working and investing through my fourth bubble bust. 1987, 2000 and 2008 and now we're going through what I think is going to be an even bigger bust than what I've previously seen in my career. Well, the overarching issue has been this compulsion with debt-funded growth. It's just been building and building and building, and you know the Federal Reserve as the driver of all this in setting interest rates did it after we had the dot-com bubble. And then that burst, Greenspan dropped interest rates lower. That encouraged people to take on mortgage debt, which gave us our subprime problem, which then gave us the GFC. The response to that was escalated, lower rates, even into the negative. You then saw more QE programs, of various natures that were rolled out, both in the US and in Europe. And that then inflated an even bigger bubble. So more debt was used to cure a debt crisis, which to me makes absolutely no sense. It's like curing alcoholism with more liquor. It's just got no bearing on reality. But what we've had a system that's gone from, prior to the GFC, you had US something like about $140 trillion worth of debt in it. We've now got over 250 trillion. And that a lot of that has been misappropriated, poorly allocated. And this was a disaster that was always going to happen. The reason that, they're called debt crises is because there's always a crisis around debt, and it's gone on for centuries. So yeah, this was a massive problem in the making, and it's now got to be unwound. It's my everything I write about is what I'm doing for our own personal financial position, and that is taking a defensive stand and being predominantly in cash term deposits. As boring and as painful as that was or has been when interest rates kept being scaled down in order to make debt cheaper, the cost of servicing debt cheaper, so you take on more debt. So to me, this didn't make sense. I didn't know when this bubble was going to meet its pin, but I did know that when it did, the fallout would be catastrophic. And in all previous occasions of this, years of gains have been wiped out in a very short space of time. We saw that in 1929, more than a decade of gains. It was actually nearly 15, 20 years of gains were wiped out in the space of 2 years. We saw that in 2000, gains were gone that were made in the preceding 5 or 6 years were gone in the space of a year or two. And we saw that in 2008, 2009. So when it happens very, very quickly. And most people want to hang in there right to the end. That's just the human nature. They want to squeeze every last pip out of the thing. And they think they're going to be smart enough, or there's going to be signals that are coming quick enough they'll be the ones to go. Well, I'm sorry. The exit door is very narrow and the crowd running to that is very large. It doesn't work. So you have to be out the door well beforehand and just wait. And in waiting, we've seen the All Ords go back, 3 years or 4 years of gains have been taken off the table. And if anyone thinks that is over, I've got a bridge I can sell them in Sydney. Markets have acted, their unpredictability has been very predictable. There's always the fall, and that builds a certain buying pressure because, there's that whole mentality of generational buying opportunity. Oh, this is so much cheaper. I can buy Commonwealth Bank stock for a third or for 2/3 what it was trading at a month or so. Oh, get in there. So there's that buying pressure, and so you get the usual bounce. It's a graphs always show you this. It's never a straight line to hell. It's always a down up phase. So what's happening is predictable. In my opinion, this sort of uneasy calm that's returned to markets is an opportunity to exit to a position where you feel comfortable. If you've been rattled by markets, the activity of late, and that 20 or 30% drop goes, whoa, maybe we might have to rethink some of our plans or our spending patterns, then you shouldn't be in the markets to the extent you are. If this has rattled you or causing you to doubt or have concerns about what the future, because history is quite clear on what awaits. There's another leg or two down, and that may go on for another year or so, but it will take this market much lower than what it currently is. And believing it's going to go back up, it just defies all mathematical logic. You would have to get the animal spirits back. You would have to get people spending more than what they're earning again, borrowing to ever greater amounts, and being quite speculative. That's not the world that we're going into. People have not yet made the connection that we now have a dislocation. We have a world that built geared up for a production of X, but we no longer have that demand. So we are now got a mismatch that has to be corrected. Yeah, the health crisis side of things, I'm about as across that as the next person. Are we in lockdown for another week? Will we need support packages for 3-6 months? No one really knows, or will there be a reinfection rate? It's all guesswork because this is unknown. So that's the health crisis side of things. But what it has done is expose our very, very fragile financial system. In the space of a matter of a few weeks, we've needed to bring out so much financial artillery, to sort of just come in there and go, to stem these, the outflow of things. So that shows you how brittle the system really was, that people just didn't have the savings, that they were geared to the red line. Everything was running at max. They needed next week's paycheck or that sort of thing to keep the whole thing ticking. People just borrowed to the extent that the banks would give them, and dropping interest rates meant they could borrow even more. So more of their income was committed to repaying this debt. So we've had it. So I think the longer this goes on, the more unsettling it will become, and the greater the psychological impact of this. Because while people are optimistic and they can see, I just borrow and I'll just pay this off and we'll keep progressing, they keep doing it. But if that turns to a social mood of pessimism or doubt, then people will rein in their spending, either voluntarily or involuntary, because they may have less income now. But that also then dominoes onto their capacity to borrow and or their willingness to borrow to the same extent. They may decide, whoa, we should be a little bit more prudent now. And I must admit, in self-isolation, I've looked around and said, what am I really missing out? Is there anything that I need from the shopping other than food and your basics and the occasional coffee? But is there anything else that I am really, really in need of? So we've built this whole consumption model. That do we really need it? And that then has created jobs. So if we have lesser demand, for argument's sake, what are all those people who have been employed in the cruise ship industry and the associated businesses like that, the suppliers of it, the whole chain that goes with that? People suddenly say, you know what, I don't think I'm going to go cruising anymore. boat builders. Oh, yeah, the whole thing is, and so little by little, this model that was built on consumption and credit for your consumption is going to contract, and this is the mismatch we have. Well, what's included in that book is the lead up, how we've arrived at this point. So to take readers on a progressive, to build the story progressively, to say, hey, this is how we've arrived here. So if you know the components of what's driven us here, you can then analyze that and say, well, are those components still at play? So be it demographics, debt, interest rates, a whole host of things that have taken us to this point. Are they still at play? And if they're not, then what is the likely outcome? And therefore you then try and be a little bit forewarned about what's coming and how to play the near term. But more importantly, is out of all this, as we've seen, when markets do fall hard, amazing opportunities come out, and they're the once in a generation type opportunities. But the problem is that generation, people don't have the money to take advantage of that. So I've always said the time to buy is when people do not want to buy, when fatigue is set in, when those spirits have just been ground to dust, and we are nowhere near that yet. Yeah, well, if you're not familiar with the Gowdie Letter, it's not the usual stock picking newsletter. It's always been about identifying trends and trying to be on the right side of that trend. So while cash was being maligned as a poor investment, well, the trend was towards there is no alternative. We went against that trend and said, no, you don't love this thing, we'll have it. So again, it's trying to work, what we look at is the bigger picture, the trends and the psychology, so that all this noise we're getting, you can just put that to one side and watch how the herd is responding and what we should be doing. So again, what's happening at present, should we be buying? No. And this is the reason why, and here's the logic behind that and what I think is going to evolve. And then when the time is getting closer to buy, starting to prepare readers for, the mobilization of that money that's been sitting in cash, and how we will do it and where we will do it, and the progressive stages of doing that. So it's really in the near term, I see it's more about trying to help people understand what's happening and trying to make better decisions. Because the industry and the general commentariat around this is hang in there, shares for the long term. Well, that history doesn't prove that to be correct, because the long term may not be your term. You may have 10, 20, 30 years of investing left. However, the next 10 or 15 years of that is spent with the market sort of correcting the excesses of the previous market, then you're going to waste an awful lot of time.
Vern Gowdie's new ebook, How to Arrange Your Wealth Now for a Post-COVID-19 World, is available for download now. In it, Vern lays out some strategies and techniques for you. Its purpose is to empower you to make rational moves with your wealth now that could see you much better off in a few years' time when, hopefully, all this is just a dreadful memory. Click the link below now to get access to your copy.